Chapter 9, Developing Psychological Skills. As you have already studied in the previous class, psychology began as an application oriented discipline. Psychological testing stands as a prime example of psychology in action. Psychology touches on many questions related to our lives. For example, what kind of personality makeup is required to become a successful human being, or what would be the right vocation for a student studying in class 12th. Similarly, there are other questions and curiosities about human beings which psychologists are asked to answer. Psychology has two kinds of application related images, first as a service oriented discipline and second as a scientific method driven research discipline. Both of these are interrelated and inseparable. It would be important to learn that there are certain factors which contribute in making psychology application oriented. First, psychologists have found both in the past and presented solutions to many problems faced by the individuals, groups, organizations, and societies require an understanding of psychological principles as problems encountered by individuals as well as societies have become more evident and acute psychologists have responded with concrete solutions. For instance, rapid increase in depressive tendencies and societal rates among adolescents is one such area where psychological knowledge dedicated to the issue of adolescent development is utilized for getting a clearer understanding of the occurrence of these phenomena, and certain intervention models are developed to assist the youth experiencing such problems early in their lives. The other reason is that expertise of psychologists has been highly valued in the marketplace over the past few years. There is a growing acceptability and demand of psychology as a profession. Various sections of society have developed a keen interest towards integrating the knowledge of psychology within their core activities. It can be seen particularly in the army or in the field of education, where in some states it has become mandatory for the schools to have a trained counselor in the field of management which seeks help or psychologist to combat problems related to recruitment and assessment, employee behavior, workplace stress, etc., in management of health related problems, and more recently, even in sports. These are not the only areas. Almost all areas of life are calling for help from psychologists. One aspect common to all the applied areas within psychology is a universal agreement on the basic assumptions about human nature and the role of a psychologist in different settings. It is generally assumed that psychologists have interest in people, their abilities, and temperaments. A psychologist from any field is required to have interest in other people and exhibits a willingness to provide help by using her his knowledge of the discipline. One can find active involvement of a psychologist in obtaining the client's history, her his sociocultural environment, assessment of her his personality, and also on other important dimensions. One might think that client is a special term which is mostly used in a clinical or counseling setup. In psychology, a client may refer to an individual, group, organization who on her his own seeks help, guidance, or intervention from a psychologist with respect to any problem faced by her him. The term skill may be defined as proficiency, facility, or dexterity that is acquired or developed through training and experience. The Webster Dictionary defines it as possession of the qualities required to do something or get something done. American Psychological Association 1973 in their task force constituted with the objective to identify skills essential for professional psychologists recommended at least three sets of skills. These are assessment of individual differences, behavior modification skills, and counseling and guidance skills. Recognition and application of these skills and competencies have strengthened the foundation and practices of applied psychology in a positive way. How can one develop into a professional psychologist? Developing as an effective psychologist, most people think that they are some kind of psychologist. We at times talk about intelligence, inferiority, complex identity crisis, mental blocks, attitude, stress, communication barriers, and so many other terms. Generally, people pick up such terms from popular writings and media. There are a lot of common sense notions about human behavior that one develops in the course of their life. Some regularity in human behavior is frequently observed by us To warrant generalization, this kind of everyday amateur psychology often misfires, sometimes even proves disastrous. There still remains a question of how to differentiate between a pseudo-psychologist from a real psychologist. An answer can be constructed by asking such questions like professional training, educational background, institutional affiliation, and her his experience in providing service. However, what is critical is training as a researcher and internalization of certain professional values. It is now recognized that the knowledge of tools used by psychologists, their methods and theories are required to develop psychological expertise. For example, a professional psychologist stresses the problem at the scientific level. They take the problem to the laboratory or study it in field settings to answer various problems. He tries to find the answer in terms of mathematical probability. Only then does he arrive at psychological principles or laws that can be depended upon. Here, another distinction should be made. Some psychologists carry out research to propound or investigate theoretical formulations, while others are concerned with our daily life activities and behavior. We need both types of psychologists. We need some scientists to develop theories and others to find solutions to human problems. It is important to know about the conditions and competences that are necessary besides research skill for a psychologist. There are conditions and competences for psychologists which have come to be recognized internationally. They cover a range of knowledge that a psychologist should possess when entering the profession after completing their education and training. These apply to practitioners, academicians, and researchers whose roles involve consulting with students, business, industry, and broader community. It is recognized that it is difficult to develop, implement, and measure competencies required in a subject like psychology, as the criteria for specification, identification, and evaluation are not yet fully agreed upon. The basic skills or competencies which psychologists have identified or becoming an effective psychologist fall into three broad sections, namely A. General skills, B. Observational skills, and C. Specific skills. General skills. These skills are generic in nature and are needed by all psychologists irrespective of their field of specialization. These skills are essential for all professional psychologists, whether they are working in the field of clinical and health psychology, industrial organizations, social, educational, or in environmental settings, or are acting as consultants. These skills include personal as well as intellectual skills. It is expected that it will not be proper to provide any form of professional training in clinical or organizational fields to students who do not possess these skills. Once a student has these skills, subsequent training in his her area of specialization would only refine and further hone these skills required by a professional within her his field of specialization. Observational skills. A great deal of what psychologists, as researchers and practitioners do in the field is to pay attention, watch, and listen carefully. They use all the senses, noticing what is seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or touched. A psychologist, thus, is like an instrument that absorbs all sources of information from the environment. We will focus more on developing observational skills. A psychologist engages in observing various facets of surroundings, including people and varying events. To begin with, a psychologist may begin with carefully scrutinizing the physical setting in order to capture its atmosphere. He might look at the color of the floor, ceiling, size of the window, doors, type of lighting, artifacts, paintings, sculptures, etc. These small, subtle, and irrelevant looking signals influence human behavior, which is why a psychologist notes such signals in the surroundings. In addition to physical surroundings, a psychologist actively engages in observing people and their actions. This may include the demographic features, age, gender, stature, race, etc., ways of dealing and relating with others, patterns of behaviors in the presence of others, etc. Psychologist records such traces because something of significance may be revealed in the process of observation. The following points are taken into consideration while taking an observation. First, observe patiently. Pay close attention to your physical surroundings. Who, what, when, where, and how. 3. Be aware of people's reactions, emotions, and motivations. 4. Ask questions that can be answered while observing. 5. Be yourself. Give you information about yourself if asked. 6. Observe with an optimistic curiosity. And 7. Be ethical. You have to respect privacy, norms of people you are observing. Take care not to disclose any information to anyone. Naturalistic observation. It is one of the primary ways of learning about the way people behave in a given setting. Suppose you want to learn how people behave in response to a heavy discount provided by a company while visiting a shopping mall. For this, you could visit the shopping mall where the discounted items are showcased and systematically observe what people do and say before and after the purchases have been made. Making comparison of this kind may provide you with useful insights into what is going on. Participant observation. It is the variation of the method of naturalistic observation. Here the observer is actively involved in the process of observing by becoming an active member of the setting where the observation takes place. For instance, for the problem mentioned above, an observer may take a part-time job in a shopping mall showroom to become an insider in order to observe variations in the behavior of customers. This technique is widely used by anthropologists whose objective is to gain a first-hand perspective of system from within which otherwise may not be readily available to an outsider. Advantages and disadvantages of observation. First, its major advantage is that it allows behavior to be seen and studied in its natural setting. Two people from outside or those already working in a setting can be trained to use it. 3. One disadvantage of it is that events being observed are subject to bias due to the feelings of the people involved as well as of the observers. 4. Generally, day to day activities in a given setting are fairly routine, which can go unnoticed by the observer. 5. Another potential pitfall is that the actual behavior and responses of others may get influenced by the presence of the observer, thus defeating the very purpose of observation. Intellectual and personal skills. Interpersonal skills, ability to listen and be empathetic, to develop respect for interest in others' cultures, experiences, values, points of view, goals and desires, fears, openness to receive feedback, etc. These skills are expressed verbally and or non-verbally. 2. Cognitive skills, ability to solve problems, engage in critical thinking and organized reasoning, and having intellectual curiosity and flexibility. 3. Affective skills, emotional control and balance, tolerance, understanding of interpersonal conflict, tolerance of ambiguity and uncertainty. 4. Personality, attitude, desire to help others, openness to new ideas, honesty, integrity, value, ethical behavior, personal courage. 5. Expressive skills, ability to communicate one's ideas, feelings, and information in verbal, non-verbal, and written forms. 6. Reflective skills, ability to examine and consider one's own motives, attitudes, behaviors, and ability to be sensitive to one's own behavior or others. 7. Personal skills, personal organization, personal hygiene, time management, and appropriate dress. Sensitivity to diversity, individual and cultural differences. Knowledge of self, one's own attitudes, values, and related strengths, limitations as one operates in the professional settings with diverse others. 2. Knowledge about the nature and impact of individual and cultural diversity in different situations. 3. Ability to work effectively with diverse backgrounds in assessment, treatment, and consultation. 4. Ability to respect and appreciate different cultural norms and beliefs. 5. Being sensitive to one's preferences and also to one's preference for own group. 6. Ability to promote diversity in cultural beliefs and respecting it to promote positive life outcomes. Specific skills. These skills are core, basic to the field of psychological service. For example, psychologists working in clinical settings need to be trained in various techniques of therapeutic interventions, psychological assessment, and counseling. Similarly, organizational psychologists working in the organizational context need to have skills in assessment, facilitation, and consultation, behavioral skills to bring about individual, group, team, and organizational development, besides research skills, etc. Those specific skills and competencies are required for a very specialized professional functioning. Nonetheless, all skill sets to overlap quite a bit. They are not exclusive to an area. Relevant specific skills and competencies can be classified as follows: A. Communication skills, speaking, active listening, body language, or non-verbal skills. B. Psychological testing skills. C. Interviewing skills. D. Counseling skills. Empathy, positive regard, authenticity, communication skills. The skills we are going to discuss may appear abstract. You will, however, understand them better when you engage in exercises related to them. Let us understand the basics of communication process and see what role it plays in fostering relationships and personal effectiveness. Learning how to be an effective communicator is not just an academic exercise, it is one of the most important skills you will need to succeed in life. Your success in this class may well depend on your ability to communicate. For example, to do well, should be able to ask and answer questions, summarize opinions, distinguish facts from opinions, and interact fruitfully with your peers and teachers. For this, you will also need listening skills in order to comprehend the information presented and what others say verbally or non-verbally. You will be required to have good presentation skills to give briefings or to present reports on projects that are part of classroom assignments. So what do we mean by communication process? It can be said that communication is a conscious or unconscious, intentional or unintentional process in which feelings and ideas are expressed as verbal and or non-verbal messages that are sent, received and comprehended. The characteristics of communication we can are communication is dynamic because the process is constantly in a state of change as the expectations, attitudes, feelings, and emotions of the persons who are communicating change. The nature of the communication also changes. Communication is continuous because it never stops whether we are asleep or awake. We are always processing ideas or thoughts. Our brain remains active. Communication is irreversible because once we send a message, we cannot take it back. Once we have made a slip of tongue, given a meaningful glance or engaged in an emotional outburst, we cannot erase it. Our apologies or denials can make it light but cannot stamp out what was communicated. Communication is interactive because we are constantly in contact with other people and with ourselves. Others react to our speech and actions, and we react to our own speech and actions and then react to those reactions. There's a cycle of action and reaction is the basis of our communication. The process of communication can be accidental, having no intent, expressive, resulting from the emotional state of the person, or rhetorical, resulting from the specific goal of the communicator. Human communication occurs on the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and public levels. Interpersonal communication involves communicating with yourself. It encompasses such activities as thought processes, personal decision making, and focusing on self. Interpersonal communication refers to the communication that takes place between two or more persons who establish a communicative relationship. Forms of interpersonal communication include face to face or mediated conversations, interview and small group discussions. Public communication is characterized by a speaker sending a message to an audience. It may be direct, such as face to face messages delivered by the speaker to an audience, or indirect, such as messages relayed over radio or television. Components of human communication. When we communicate selectively. That is from the wide range of repertory of words, actions, etc. available to us. We choose that which we believe is best suited for the idea we wish to express. When we communicate, we encode, that is, take ideas, give them meaning, and put them into message forms, and send the idea through a channel. It is composed of our primary signal system based on our senses, that is, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touching. The message is sent to someone who receives it using her or his primary signal system. He decodes, that is, translates messages into understandable forms. For example, you may say that you heard a bell or an object feels soft. These are examples of verbal communication which express how you understand the signals your senses have received. You can also respond at a non-verbal level. You touch a hot stove, your fingers pull away quickly, and your eyes well up with tears. The pulling away of fingers and welling up of eyes with tears will communicate to an onlooker the pain suffered by you. The model in figure 9.1 shows the process of communication involving different stages. We can see that in any communication process, the degree to which the communication is effective depends on the communicator's mutual understanding of the signals or codes being used in transmitting a message and in receiving. Suppose you are about to take an examination, suddenly realize that you have not brought your pen to class. You ask your friend, "Do you have an extra pen that you can spare for me?" She says yes and gives you the pen. You have just participated in an effective communication transaction. You, communicator A, encoded a message, "You need a pen," and used a channel for transmitting it, vocal cords, producing sound waves, to your friend, communicator B. Your friend received the message using her sensory agent, ears, and decoded it, understood that You want a pen. Your friends feedback the word yes and appropriate behavior of giving a pen to you indicated that the message was successfully received and decoded. The communication would have been still effective if she had said sorry, I cannot because I am carrying only one pen. You may remember that the act of speech itself is not communication. Speech is only a biological act, the utterance of sound. Possibly the use of language communication is broader. It involves a relationship among two or more people in which they attempt to share meaning so that the intent of message received is the same as the intent of the message sent. Speaking, one important component of communication is speaking with the use of language. Language involves use of symbols which package meaning within them. To be effective, a communicator must know how to use language appropriately. Because language is symbolic, it is necessary to be as clear and precise as possible when using words. Communication takes place within a context, so one needs to consider the other's frame of reference, that is, the context used by the sender to say something. Also, whether she shares your interpretation. If not, it is important to adjust your vocabulary level and choice of words to fit the level of the listener. Remember that slang expressions, words unique to a culture or region, and euphemism can sometimes become obstacle in good communication. Listening is an important skill that we use daily. Your academic success, employment achievement, personal happiness to a large extent depend upon your ability to listen effectively. At first, listening may appear to you as a passive behavior as it involves silence, but this image of passivity is far from true. Listening requires a person to be attentive. He should be patient, non judgmental, and yet have the capacity to analyze and respond. Hearing and listening are not the same. Hearing is a biological activity that involves reception of a message through sensory channels. It is only a part of listening, a process that involves reception, attention, assignment of meaning, and listener's response to the message presented. Reception, the initial step in the listening process, is the reception of a stimulus or message. A message could be auditory and or visual. The hearing process is based on a complex set of physical interactions that take place involving the ear and the brain. In addition to using the hearing mechanism, people listen through their visual system. They observe a person's facial expressions, posture, movement, and appearance, which provide important cues that may not be obvious merely by listening to the verbal part of the message. Attention, once the stimulus, that is, the word or visual or both, is received, it reaches the attention stage of the human processing system. In this way, the other stimuli receives so that we can concentrate on specific words or visual symbols. Normally, your attention is divided between what you are attempting to listen to and what is happening around you and what is going on in your mind. Consider you are watching a movie. The person in front of you is constantly whispering to her his friend. There is a buzz in the sound system. You are also worried about the forthcoming examination, so your attention is being pulled in different directions. Divided attention makes it difficult for you to receive signals or messages. Paraphrasing, how would you know that someone has been listening? Ask her him to restate what you had said. The person doing this doesn't repeat your exact words. He makes a summary of the ideas just received and provides you with a restatement of what he understands. This is called paraphrasing. It allows you to understand how much he understood of what was communicated. If someone cannot repeat or write down a summary of what was said, then he probably did not get the whole message or did not understand. We can keep this in mind when we are listening to a teacher in the class or to others. Try to paraphrase what you heard, and if you cannot do so, you should seek immediate clarification if possible. Try verbally paraphrasing the next time you are engaged in a demanding conversation, such as when you are receiving directions or when you are in a conflict situation with a friend. Repeat to the speaker what you think she or he had just said in order to check whether you both received and understood the same thing. You will be surprised how many times conflicts result from miscommunication. Assignment of meaning, the process of putting the stimulus we have received into some predetermined category, develops as we acquire language. We develop mental categories for interpreting the message we receive. For instance, our categorizing system for the word cheese may include such factors as a dairy product, speculoos, taste, and color, all of which help us to relate the word cheese to the sense in which it is used. Role of culture in listening. Like the brain, the culture in which we have been brought up also influences our listening and learning abilities. Asian cultures such as India emphasize on listening by being a silent communicator when receiving messages from seniors or elders. Some cultures focus on controlling attention. Buddhism, or for instance, has a notion called mindfulness. This means devoting your complete attention to whatever you are doing. Training in mindfulness, which starts in childhood, can help to develop longer attention spans and therefore lead not only to better listening but also to sympathetic listening. However, in many cultures, such listening enhancing concepts are present. Body language. Do you believe that when you communicate with another person, your words communicate the complete meaning of the message? If your answer is yes, then you are mistaken. We all know that it is possible to communicate a great deal even without using verbal language. We are aware that non-verbal acts are symbolic and closely connected to any talk in process. Such non-verbal acts are part of what is called body language. Body language is composed of all those messages that people exchange besides words. While reading body language, we must remember that a single nonverbal signal does not carry complete meaning. Factors such as gestures, postures, eye contact, clothing style, and body movement, all of them have to be considered together, that is, in a cluster. Also, in verbal communication, nonverbal signs can have many different meanings. For example, crossing arms over the chest may suggest that a person likes to keep aloof, but crossed arms accompanied by an erect posture, tightened body muscles, a set clenched jaw and narrowing of the eyes are likely to communicate anger. A person's background and past patterns of behavior are also considered when we analyze body language. The consistency between current and past patterns of behavior as well as harmony between verbal and nonverbal communication is termed as congruency. When you say to your friend, you do not look well today, you are basing your statement on an evaluation of the person's appearance today and comparing it with how he looked in the past. In other words, something has changed and you see that difference. If you do not have experience to draw on, you would not have noticed the change. Let us recall how much we use body language to encourage or discourage conversation. For instance, we consciously wave at waiters or friends to catch their attention. Much of the use of body language occurs in conversing with others without conscious realization. Psychological testing skills. The next set of competencies which psychologists require is concerned with the knowledge base of the discipline of psychology. They involve psychological assessment, evaluation, and problem solving with individuals and groups, organization, and the community. Psychologists have always been interested in understanding individual differences from the time of Galton in the late 19th century. Psychological tests have been devised and are primarily used for the determination and analysis of individual differences in general intelligence, differential aptitudes, educational achievement, vocational fitness, personality, social attitudes, and various non intellectual characteristics. Psychological tests have also been used for studying a variety of psychological studies on groups. Besides making an assessment of a particular individual, psychologists study these differences based on factors such as occupation, age, gender, education, culture, etc. While using psychological tests, an attitude of objectivity, scientific orientation, and standardized interpretation must be kept in mind. For example, in organizational and personal work, in business and industry where specialized tests are used to select individuals for specific jobs, it is essential to use actual performance records or ratings as a criterion for establishing validity of a test. Suppose a personal department wants to know whether a certain psychological test can help it to identify potentially best stenographers. It must be established that the test differentiates among employees of several performance levels. In addition, it should be found that the performance on the job of a newly employed worker selected on the basis of a test and it matches with his test scores. Some tips to improve your listening skills. First, recognize that both the sender as well as the receiver have equal responsibility in making effective communication. 2. Refrain from forming an early judgment about information that is being communicated. Be open to all ideas. 3. Be a patient listener. Do not be in a hurry to respond. 4. Avoid ego speak, that is, do not talk only about what you want to talk about. Give consideration also to others and to what they say. 5. Be careful to the emotional Be careful to the emotional responses which certain words are likely to bring about. Be aware that your posture affects your listening. Control distractions. If in doubt, try to paraphrase. Also check with the sender whether he has been correctly understood by you. Visualize what is being said. That is, try to translate the message in the form of a correct action. Essentials of psychological assessment skills. Psychological assessment is a basic competency required by psychologists. It includes knowledge of comprehensive and integrated assessment of persons based on interviewing, psychological testing, and evaluation of the outcomes of psychological services. The skills needed for psychological assessment are First, ability to select and implement multiple methods and means of evaluation in ways that are responsive to and respectful of diverse individuals, couples, families, and groups. Two, ability to utilize systematic approaches to gather data required for taking decisions. Three, knowledge of psychometric issues and basis of assessment methods. Four, knowledge of issues related to integration of different data sources. 5. Ability to integrate assessment data from different sources for diagnostic purposes. 6. Ability to formulate and apply diagnosis to understand strengths and limitations of current diagnostic approaches. 7. Capacity for effective use of supervision to implement and enhance skills. Anyone who uses a psychological test has to be a professionally qualified psychologist trained in psychological testing. Psychological tests are administered strictly based on information given in the test manual. The facts required for this purpose are: first, purpose of the test, that is what it has to be used for, to target population for which it can be used. Three types of validation done on the test, that is on what basis it can be said that it measures what it claims to measure. 3. Fourth, the external criteria of validation, that is the areas in which it has been found working. 5. The reliability indices, that is how much error is possible in scores. 6. The standardization sample, that is when the test was constructed, who were tested. For example, Indians or Americans, rural, urban, literate, semi-literate, etc. Time taken in the administration of test. Scoring patterns, that is what is to be scored and what methods is to be used. Norms, that is what kinds are available, what is the appropriate group which is to be used for interpretation of scores, for example male, female, age groups, etc. Influence of any special factors, for example presence of others, stress situations, etc. Limitations of the test, that is who and what it cannot assess conditions in which it may not give good assessment. Interviewing skills. An interview is a purposeful conversation between two or more people that follows a basic question and answer format. Interviewing is more formal than most other conversations because it has a set purpose and uses a focused structure. There are many kinds of interviews. The employment interview is one which most of you are likely to face. Some other formats are information gathering interview, counseling interview, interrogatory interview, radio television interview, and research interview. Interview format. Once the objectives of the interview are established, the interviewer prepares an interview format. The basic format, regardless of the interview's purpose, is divided into three stages, namely opening the body and the closing. Opening of the interview. The opening of interview involves establishing rapport between two communicators. The purpose is to make the interview comfortable. Generally, the interviewer starts a conversation and does most of the talking at the outset. This serves two functions, that is, it establishes the goal of interview and gives the interviewee time to become comfortable with the situation and the interviewer. Body of the interview. The body of the interview is the heart of the process. In this stage, the interviewer asks questions in an attempt to generate information and data that are required for the purpose. Sequence of questions to accomplish the purpose of an interview. The interviewer prepares a set of questions, also called a schedule, for different domains or categories he wants to cover. To do this, the interviewer must first decide on the domains, categories under which information is to be generated. For example, in the questions used in the job interview, the interviewer asks several selected categories such as nature of the organization, that organization last worked for, satisfaction with the past job, views on product, etc. These categories and the questions within them are framed ranging from easy to answer to difficult to answer. Questions are also formulated to assess facts as well as subjective assessment. Closing of the interview. While closing the interview, the interviewer should summarize what she has been able to gather. One should end with a discussion of the next step to be taken. When the interview is ending, the interviewer should give a chance to the interviewee to ask questions or offer comments. Types of interview questions. Direct question, they are explicit and require specific information. For example, where did you last work? Open-ended question, they are less direct and specify only the topic. For example, how happy were you with your job on the whole? Close-ended questions, they provide separate response. They provide response alternatives, narrowing the response variations. For example, do you think knowledge of a product or communication skill is more important for a salesperson? Bipolar question, it is a form of close-ended question. It requires a yes or no response. For example, would you like to work for the company? Leading question, it encourages a response in favor of a specific answer. For example, wouldn't you say you are in favor of having officers union in the company? Mirror question, they are intended to get a person to reflect on what she or he had said and expand on it. For example, you said, I work so hard but I am unable to get success. Please explain as to why this happens. Answering interview questions. First, if you do not understand the question, ask for clarification. 2, restate the question in your answer. 3, answer one question at a time. 4, try to turn negative questions into positive ones. Counseling skills. Another prerequisite for developing as a psychologist is the competence in the domain of counseling and guidance. In order to develop these competencies, psychologists must undergo proper training and education under guided supervision. The consequences of getting into a wrong vocation are pretty serious. If a person enters a job for which he does not have requisite aptitude, he can develop serious problems of adjustments, develop negative emotions, suffer from inferiority complex, etc. These difficulties may then come to be projected onto someone else. Contrary to this, if anyone who takes a vocation for which he is well adapted, there will be considerable satisfaction in doing the job well. The positive feeling thus generated would have tremendous impact on overall life adjustment. Counseling is also one such domain where a person entering the field is required to engage in self introspection in order to assess his inclination and basic skill set for being effective in his vocation. Meaning and nature of counseling. Counseling provides a system for planning the interview, analyzing the counselor's and client's behavior, and determining the developmental impact on the client. In this section, we will discuss skills, concepts, and methods that are designed to help develop concrete competencies. A counselor is most often interested in building an understanding of the client's problem by focusing on what understanding the client has of his problem and how he feels about it. The actual or objective facts of the problems are considered less important, and it is considered more important to work on the feelings and the acknowledgement by the clients. The focus is more on the person and how he defines the problem. Counseling involves helping relationship that includes someone seeking help and someone willing to give help, who is capable of or trained to help in a setting that permits help to be given and received. The following elements about counseling are common to the major theoretical approaches to counseling. First, counseling involves responding to the feelings, thoughts, and actions of the clients. 2, counseling involves basic acceptance of the client's perceptions and feelings without using any evaluative standards. 3, confidentiality and privacy constitute essential ingredients in the counseling setting. Physical facilities that preserve this quality are important. 4, counseling is voluntary. It takes place when a client approaches a counselor. A counselor never uses any kind of question or for obtaining information. 5, counselors and clients both transmit and receive verbal and non-verbal messages during the process. Therefore, awareness and sensitivity to the nature of the message is an important prerequisite for a counselor's effectiveness. Breaking the myths of counseling. First, counseling is not merely giving information. 2, counseling is not giving advice. 3, counseling is not selection and placement of individuals onto jobs or for courses. Counseling is not the same as interviewing, though interviewing may be involved. Counseling is not influencing attitudes, beliefs, and behavior by persuading, admonishing, threatening, or compelling. Developing effective relationships. For most people who seek help from a counselor, effective or satisfying relationships are almost non existent or infrequent. Since change in behavior is often created and supported by a network of social support, it is essential for clients to start developing more positive relationships with other persons. The counseling relationship is the initial vehicle through which this begins. Like all of us, counselors too are not perfect, but they are trained in developing a more healthy and helpful relationship than others. In brief, counseling usually has an all inclusive outcome for the clients. Effective behavioral change that takes place in the client is multifaceted. It may show up in the form of a client taking greater responsibility, developing new insight, learning to engage in different behaviors, and making an effort to develop more effective relationships. Characteristics of effective helper. Being a trained helper, the counselor has the responsibility of ensuring that his client is benefited from counseling and its therapeutic effects are achieved. To a large extent, however, the success of a counseling process depends on the skill, knowledge, attitude, personal qualities, and behavior of a counselor, any or all of which can enhance or diminish the helping process. In this section, we will discuss four qualities that are associated with effective counselors. These include first, authenticity, two, positive regard for others, three, ability to empathize, and four, paraphrasing. First, authenticity. Your image or perception of yourself makes up your I. The self perceived I is revealed through ideas, words, actions, clothing, and your lifestyle. All of these communicate your I to others. Those who come into close contact with you also build their own image of you for themselves, and they also sometimes communicate this image for you. For example, friends tell you what they like and dislike about you. Your teachers and parents praise and or criticize you. You are also evaluated by persons you respect. These collected judgments by people you respect also called significant others develop into a me. This other perceived me is the person that others perceive you to be. This perception may be the same as or different from your own self perception or of I. The degree to which you are aware of these perceptions of others as well as of your own perception of yourself indicates that you are self aware. Authenticity means that your behavioral expressions are consistent with what you value and the way you feel and relate to your inner self image. Two, positive regard for others. In a counseling counsel relationship, a good relationship allows freedom of expression. It reflects acceptance of the idea that the feelings of both are important. We should remember that when we form a new relationship, we experience feelings of uncertainty and anxiety. Such feelings are minimized when a counselor extends a positive regard to the client by accepting that it is all right to feel the way the client is feeling. In order to show positive regard to others, the following guidelines may be kept in mind. First, when you are speaking, get into the habit of using I messages rather than you messages. An example of this would be I understand rather than you should not. To respond to what the other person has said after checking with him, her. 3. Give the other person the freedom to share feelings or anything he wants to say. Do not interrupt or cut in. 4. Do not assume that the other person knows what you are thinking. Express yourself according to the frame of reference that is in the context of the verbal exchange taking place. 5. Do not label either yourself or the other person. For example, you are an introvert, etc. 3. Empathy. This is one of the most critical competencies that a counselor needs to have. Empathy is the ability of a counselor to understand the feelings of another person from her or his perspective. It is like stepping into someone else's shoes and trying to understand the pain and troubled feelings of the other person. There is a difference between sympathy and empathy. It's sympathy, you play the savior. You may think that someone deserves your kindness. For paraphrasing, this skill has already been discussed in the section on communication earlier. We will recall that this involves the ability of a counselor to reflect on what the client says and feels using different words. Ethics of counseling. In recent years, counselors have taken important steps to develop their professional identity. A critical criterion for any professional group is the development and implementation of appropriate ethical standards. Social workers, marriage counselors, family therapists, and psychologists all have their ethical codes. Awareness of the ethical standards and codes is extremely important because counseling is a part of the service sector. Not following the ethical standards may have legal implications. While learning about the competencies of a counselor, it is important for you to know that the client counselor relationship is built on ethical practice. The American Psychological Association has developed a code of ethical conduct for behavior and decision making in actual clinical settings. The practical knowledge of these ethical domains can guide the practice of counseling in achieving its desired purpose. Some of the APA practice guidelines are: first, knowledge of ethical professional code standards and guidelines, knowledge of statutes, rules, regulations, and case law relevant to the practice of psychology. 2. Recognize and analyze ethical and legal issues across a range of professional activities in the clinical setting. 3. Recognize and understand the ethical dimensions, features of her his own attitudes and practice in the clinical setting. 4. Seek appropriate information and consultation when faced with ethical issues. 5. Practice appropriate professional assertiveness related to ethical issues. Summarizing the chapter, the gender and specific skills form the core competencies essential for a psychologist to act in a more responsive and ethical manner before entering any profession arena. It It therefore becomes pertinent for a psychologist to equip herself himself with these indispensable competencies. Two general skills include personal as well as intellectual skills. These skills are essential for all professional psychologists, whether they are working in the field of clinical and health psychology, industrial, organizational, social, educational, or in environmental settings, or are acting as consultants. Three specific skills are core basic to the field of psychological service. For example, psychologists working in clinical settings need to be trained in various techniques of therapeutic intervention, psychological assessment, and counseling. 4. In order to become an effective psychologist, one needs to have certain characteristics such as competence, integrity, professional, scientific responsibility, respect for people's rights and dignity, etc. 5. Observation skills are basic skills and are used by psychologists as a starting point for providing insights into behavior. The two major approaches to observation are naturalistic observation and participant observation. 6. Communication is a process that helps in transmitting meaning from one person to another. Speaking and listening are central to interpersonal communication. Language is important for communication. Its use should be done according to the characteristics of audience. Nonverbal cues such as gestures, postures, hand movement, etc. are also used to communicate ideas. Creating a proper message, tackling environmental noise, and providing feedback are ways of reducing distortions and making effective communication. Interviewing is a process of face to face communication. It proceeds through three stages, which include the warm up, opening stage, the question and answer, the body, and the closing stage. Developing the skills of psychological testing is important since tests are important tools used for the assessment of individuals for various purposes. Proper training is required for administration, scoring, and interpretation of tests. Counseling involves Counseling involves helping relationship that includes someone seeking help and someone willing to give help. The qualities that are associated with effective counselors are: first, authenticity; two, positive regard for others; three, ability to empathize; and four, paraphrasing.